since Mr Abbott and Mr Hockey handed down their first budget, we have spoken a lot about broken promises. We have, of course, the Prime Minister's promise that there would be no cuts to pensions, no cuts to health and no cuts to education. And one of the other things that Mr Abbott told the Australian people was that it was an absolute principle of democracy that governments should not and must not say one thing before an election and do another thing after the election. So what we have seen, Mr Acting Deputy President, this government and this Prime Minister doing exactly that. So, of course, in order to break the promises they made to the Australian people, and the Australian people accepted in good faith, they've had to manufacture a budget emergency. And we heard quite a lot of that in Senator O'Sullivan's contribution. And I would like to put on record here today, in the words of our Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, that the Charter of Budget Honesty makes it harder for the new Treasurer to engage in these tricks, and so Mr Hockey has gone to extraordinary lengths in the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, making an unwarranted and unasked-for grant to the Reserve Bank, changing economic parameters and assumptions to double the forecast budget deficit, adding $68 billion to it since the election for the base political purpose of both demonising the record of the previous government and providing an alibi for cuts he always intended to make. Now, this budget is cruel, it is harsh, it is an attack on the long-held value of fairness, a fair go for Australians, and it's an affront to Australia's sense of fairness. The measures in this budget are not fair for millions of Australians who will struggle to survive and be condemned to a life of despair and poverty. It breaks the promise of hope, of fairness, a future that sits at the heart of our great country. We will not support measures that destroy the fair go that Australia has been built on and of which we are all justifiably proud. A kind and caring country where people look after each other. The character of a government is best reflected by their budget. A government's budget tells you more about their character, about their priorities and about what drives them than any slogan or glossy brochure ever can. And what this budget tells us about the Abbott government is stark. This is a government who offers no hope, no plans for growth, a government that only offers inequality and unfairness. In his budget speech, Mr Hockey said that the budget must always be about people. About people, Mr Acting Deputy President. This is a galling statement by the Treasurer. This budget is not about people. This budget is not even about debt or deficit or the budget bottom lines. Rather, it's about the twisted values and flawed ideology of the Abbott government. In his budget reply speech, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Shorten, said, and I quote, that we, Labor, still believe in fairness. We still believe in an Australia that includes everyone, that helps everyone, that lets everyone be their best, that leaves no one behind. Mr Acting Deputy President, this is the Australia that I know, that I work for, and that those opposite so easily forget and cast aside. This is the Australia with a sense of fairness and equality at its heart that Labor will always fight for. In his book Battle Lines, Mr Abbott writes, and I quote, "Conservative sides of politics normally have to overcome the popular impression that the Labor Party believes in fairness, while the Liberal Party just believes in good economic management. In my experience, the Liberals are hardly less passionate about fairness than members of the Labor Party." End quote. On the contrary, Mr Abbott's first budget shows he and his government are hardly passionate about fairness. This budget is not fair and people are worried. The government know that people are worried. I'm sure they are receiving the same emails, the same constituent calls, the same letters, talking to them, asking them to reconsider some of the harsher measures in their budget. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, this budget is not fair and it will leave millions of Australians worse off. The budget is not fair, and that is why people who speak to me are outraged and fearful, and that is why Labor will fight measures in this budget to ensure we preserve a fair go for everyone. Those opposite argue that the draconian budget measures are necessary because we are living beyond our means, and that is not true. We know that under Labor there was low inflation, low interest rates and around 1 million new jobs created. We had low debt by world standards when Labor left office. Our net government debt was around 12% of GDP, when other advanced economies around the world averaged 74.9%. Labor supports responsible savings, and this is what we did in office. In looking at savings measures, Labor always weighs up two considerations: the impact on long-term fiscal sustainability and fairness. This is because on this side, Mr Acting Deputy President, we don't believe that we need to choose between economic development and fairness. Unlike those opposite, we do not think that our nation has to choose between growth and being fair. We know that budgets necessarily involve choices, but this is not a choice we believe has to be made because it is a false choice. Those opposite have set up this false choice on the basis of false claims, including claims that we are spending too much on welfare. These claims do not stand up. We spend less on welfare than any other country across the OECD except for Iceland. If government expenditure is a problem, why would the Prime Minister want to pay wealthy women $50,000 to have a baby, a paid parental scheme that will cost $22 billion? Is that fair? The Tasmanians I speak to do not believe it is fair. They are worried and scared about what the future holds, and that of their children because of the Abbott government's budget. People are shocked by the government's decision to make $80 billion in savage cuts to schools and hospitals. Others are deeply concerned by the vicious cuts to family payments. One mother wrote to me that she feared she would not be able to pay her rent because she would lose $100 a fortnight under the changes to the Family Tax Benefit B. She is distressed that she may not be able to provide a home for her 2 children, and she knows she will never afford to pay for braces for her teenage daughter. A retired lady emailed me to tell how the removal of the concessions will affect her and her husband. She gets a part pension and already lives very frugally. She rightly points out the real impact of this budget is hidden in the detail. She says the removal of the concessions will be, in her words, devastating. Perhaps most telling, Mr Acting Deputy President, are the letters and emails I've received from Tasmanians that say that while they will not be adversely affected by the budget because they are on high incomes, they are upset about the treatment of low-income earners and those who rely on a helping hand from the government to survive. They know this is not fair. It is not the Australian way. Those already struggling will bear the brunt of this budget. They will do the Treasurer's heavy lifting. Sick people will have to find an extra $7 for the GP tax every time they go to the doctor. But of course, we know the GP tax payment is not going to the so-called budget deficit. It's going to the future fund. They argue this case. They manufacture a debt emergency, but then they put in measures, extreme, harsh measures, that will affect the sick and those that can little afford it, and it's not even going to the budget deficit. It doesn't make sense, and it only can be because an ideologically driven meanness. That's all it can be. So also we have the $7 GP tax, and of course they ask how can they afford to take their children to the doctor, and if they have a prescription to fill, Mr Acting Deputy President, how will they afford the extra $5 for that? Mr Hockey's attempts to dismiss the impact of the $7 GP tax demonstrates just how out of touch this government really is. They show callous regard for the financial pressures facing average Australian families. One pensioner, Mr Acting Deputy President, wrote to me about the impact of the $7 GP tax. She said she'd recently been to the doctor, who sent her for a blood test, then called her back because of to discuss the results, which led to new blood tests and an ultrasound and another visit to the doctor to get the results. This pensioner said she would have been $42 out of pocket in 2 weeks. This is what she said, and I quote, "I would not have spent the $42 on beer or cigarettes. It would probably go towards my power bill or food. I am, however, more concerned that children will not receive the medical care they need because some parents must decide between food and medical treatment." End quote. The GP tax is not fair. Surely the lucky country can do better than this. There should be no choice for parents as to whether they feed their children or take them to the doctor. It's just not pensioners and people on low incomes who are worried about the GP tax. The Australian Medical Association, which supports some co-payments, is emphatic about the $7 GP tax. The AMA President and neurosurgeon Brian Owler said of the tax, and I quote, "The co-payment is unfair and unnecessary. Ideology has pushed this proposal too far. The Prime Minister should step in and scrap this policy." End quote. So, to be very clear, the peak doctor's body, the AMA, says no to the GP tax because it's unfair. The budget is unfair in so many ways because it targets those who can least afford it. People will be faced with difficult decisions that could have a huge impact on their ability to engage in work and education, their health and the opportunities they have to go out and have a meaningful life. Parents are not telling me they are going to have to give up a takeaway coffee, but they are worried about being able to buy fresh food, meat and vegetables for their children. People are telling me that going to the doctors or filling a script will come at the expense of other essentials, petrol for the car or money for rent or the power bill. Pensioners are telling me they will no longer be able to afford a bus ticket to go to the shops or go to the neighbourhood centres or visit friends or relatives. Families are telling me that their children will not be able to participate in school activities and sports. We are talking about people becoming socially excluded from their communities. Services that provide food and emergency relief are telling me they don't know how they will meet the expected increase in demand for support. It is pensioners who tell me they're going hungry because they can't afford to buy food as well as pay the rent and have the heater on. We know that pensioners and seniors have nothing to celebrate from this budget. This budget will slash the current indexation system, which helps pensions keep pace with the cost of living. Had Mr Abbott's new indexation system been in place for the last 4 years, a single pension on the maximum rate would be around $1,500 a year worse off than they are today. His decision, Mr Abbott's decision, Mr Acting Deputy President, to increase the pension age to 70 by 2035 will mean Australians will have to work longer and their pension will be significantly reduced. And their pension will be significantly reduced when they finally are able to retire. I know many people, especially blue-collar workers, low-income workers and women, will simply not be able to work until they are 70. When Labor increased the pension age to 67, Our decision was supported by a comprehensive review into Australia's pension system. This government has provided no evidence to support an increase in the pension age to 70. We know that increasing the pension age to 70 will mean that Australia has the highest pension age across the OECD. This budget also abolishes the pensioner education supplement from the 1st of January 2015, currently $62.40 or $31.20 a fortnight for pensioners undertaking approved study. Seniors who have accumulated modest savings to support themselves in retirement will also be hit by the abolition of the senior supplement for holders of the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card after the June 24 payment. None of these budget changes are good for pensioners or seniors or anyone looking to retire. Those setting out to start their careers will also be hit unfairly by this budget. In my home state of Tasmania, the changes in the budget to tertiary education hit the University of Tasmania with a massive $30 million cut. A massive cut, Mr Acting Deputy President. Many parents and students have contacted me to say they will now not be able to go to university because they simply will not be able to afford it. We know that more than $172 million will be cut from equity funding for low-income students attending university. This will do nothing to help students from low and middle-income families from fulfilling their ambition to go to university. They will be discouraged from studying because they will be faced with crippling debts. This makes a mockery of Mr Abbott's learn or earn mantra. Young Tasmanians already struggling to get a job. Access to higher education not only benefits students, but is also important for the development of a more vibrant community. Without equitable access to higher education, Tasmania will not be able to build a strong and smart economy in the 21st century. Mature-age students who want to improve their skills and chances of getting a job will also be faced with higher fees and possible cuts to the subjects being offered. I have had young Tasmanians write to me, including several already have university degrees who can't get a job. Other young people have asked me what happens if they are retrenched. The New Start arrangements in the budget have people very worried, Mr Acting Deputy President. They are very worried, and the changes in the budget are unfair and harsh on all job seekers under the age of 30. They expect young job seekers under the age of 30 to have no support whatsoever when they look for work. A person aged under 30 who loses their job through no fault of their own will get nothing from this government for 6 months. They will not receive 1 cent. And at the same time, the government is asking for the same job seekers who receive no support whatsoever to look for 40 jobs a month. So they get no support, no money, not 1 cent. So how will they survive? What will they live on? Where will they live? How will they afford to prepare job applications or even get a job interview? Not everyone has a family who can support them for 6 months, and contrary to the government's view, young people in Tasmania are not unemployed because they lack skills, qualifications or motivation to find work. There simply are not enough jobs. In parts of my home state, youth unemployment is as high as 20%. That is 1 in 5 young Tasmanians who do not have a job. People who are living from fortnight to fortnight are already struggling with the cost of living, and these are the people that are hit the hardest by this budget. It's very difficult to find anyone who does not suffer because of the budget, unless you're wealthy. The budget paying for many has been by the decision to scrap the low-income superannuation contribution. This will mean 3.6 million low-paid workers will lose a yearly tax refund of up to $500. How on earth anyone in the government can say this is a fair budget is beyond me. It is an unfair budget. It's an affront to Australians. Order.